is 11:30 in the morning on April 30th, 1980. Prince's Gate, London. A quiet Georgian terrace in one of the most expensive postcodes in the world. 6 men move toward the Iranian Embassy at number 16. They are armed with automatic weapons and grenades. Within 90 seconds, they are inside. The shots that will be heard immediately go quiet, replaced by something more disturbing: silence. Then, the first calls to the police. Then, the machinery of the British state begins to activate. At New Scotland Yard, duty officers are already reaching for secure lines. At the Home Office, officials are opening emergency protocols. And in a barracks that officially does not exist, a unit that is rarely spoken of publicly begins to receive its first intelligence brief. The siege of the Iranian embassy at Prince's Gate will last exactly 6 days. It will end in 11 minutes of violence that is broadcast live on British television to an audience of millions. It will establish the SAS as the most famous counterterrorism force in the world. And it will define the doctrine of hostage rescue in urban environments for a generation. This is the command structure. Let's break it down. To understand why 6 armed men walked into the Iranian embassy in London on a Wednesday morning in April 1980, you need to understand 3 converging forces: the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution, the politics of Arab separatism in Khuzestan province, and the specific vulnerability of Iranian diplomatic missions in the first year after the revolution. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was one of the most consequential political upheavals of the 20th century. The Shah's government, secular and pro-Western, sustained by US and British support, was overthrown by a popular uprising with Islamist leadership. Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in Paris to lead a revolutionary government that defined itself in opposition to the West, particularly to the United States and Britain, both of which were associated in revolutionary ideology with the Shah's repressive security apparatus. The revolution was neither politically monolithic nor ethnically uniform. Iran is a country of significant ethnic diversity: Persians, Azerbaijanis, Kurds, Baluchis, Arabs. In Khuzestan province, the oil-rich southwestern region bordering Iraq, a substantial Arab population had long-standing grievances about political marginalization, cultural suppression, and unequal distribution of oil revenues. The Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan, DRFLA, was the organization that carried out the London Embassy seizure. Its members referred to the province by its Arab name, Arabistan. The group's ideology combined Arab nationalist politics with opposition to the new Islamic revolutionary government, which they regarded as having continued and intensified the Persian chauvinist policies of the Shah toward Arab minorities. The timing of the attack, April 1980, 14 months after the revolution, was significant. The Iranian revolutionary government was simultaneously managing a domestic crisis, an internal factional struggle, and the ongoing hostage drama at the American Embassy in Tehran, where 66 U.S. diplomats had been seized by revolutionary students in November 1979. Now, the Iranian government was in no position to respond to a simultaneous crisis involving its own diplomatic mission abroad. The choice of the Iranian embassy in London as the target was not random. It reflected several specific strategic calculations. London was home to a large and politically active Iranian exile community. Both monarchists who had fled after the revolution and leftist and ethnic minority activists who had initially supported the revolution, but now opposed the Khomeinist consolidation of power. The city was a center of Iranian opposition politics, and the embassy was the most visible symbol of the Islamic Republic's presence in Britain. Britain, in 1980, was also a country with a specific political valence in Iranian revolutionary discourse. The British government, and specifically the British Intelligence Service, MI6, was widely believed in Iran to have been a co-architect of the 1953 CIA/MI6 coup that restored the Shah after a brief period of nationalist government under Prime Minister Mossadegh. This historical grievance gave the Iranian Embassy in London a symbolic weight that went beyond its diplomatic function. The DRFLA's choice of London also reflected a calculation about media access. London, in 1980, was one of the most heavily media-covered cities in the world. A hostage siege at a prominent embassy in central London would receive immediate and sustained international attention, giving the group a platform for their demands that no operation in Iran itself could provide. The media dimension was not incidental to the operation. It was central to its strategic logic. The specific demands the group brought into the building on April 30th reflected their political agenda. The release of 91 Arab political prisoners held in Iranian jails, and the recognition of the rights of the Arab population of Khuzestan. They wanted to negotiate directly with a representative of the Khomeini government. They wanted a safe passage guarantee, and they wanted the world to watch. Margaret Thatcher had been Prime Minister for less than a year when the Iranian Embassy Siege began. Her government was dealing simultaneously with severe economic recession, high unemployment, the aftermath of the winter of discontent, and significant civil unrest. The IRA bombing campaign in Northern Ireland was ongoing and had extended to mainland Britain. The political environment was defined by the perception of state authority under challenge. This context shaped how the Thatcher government would respond to the embassy siege. A government that had built its political identity on the restoration of state authority and the rejection of conciliation could not be seen to negotiate from weakness with armed gunmen in the middle of London. The political stakes of the crisis went beyond the immediate safety of the hostages. The British security architecture in 1980 had a specific structure for responding to domestic terrorist incidents. Primary responsibility lay with the Metropolitan Police, which would manage the outer perimeter, the negotiation process, and the public-facing elements of the response. Military involvement required a specific political authorization, a Cabinet Office Briefing Room, or COBR decision. Because deploying military force domestically in Britain required formal government approval, a constitutional constraint with deep roots in British history. The SAS, the Special Air Service, had been developing a counterterrorism capability since the early 1970s, specifically in response to the Munich massacre of 1972. By 1980, B Squadron's counter-revolutionary warfare wing had developed doctrine, equipment, and training for exactly the type of operation that was now being called for. They had been rehearsing building assaults, aircraft rescues, and close-quarters battle scenarios for 8 years. They had not yet been called on to execute one domestically. The 6-man assault team was led by Oan Ali Mohammed, known as Salim, a 27-year-old from Khuzestan. The group had traveled to London through multiple European countries, entering Britain as students. Their weapons, 3 Browning automatic pistols, 1 Scorpion machine pistol, 1 Astra revolver, and several fragmentation grenades, had been smuggled into the country in advance, almost certainly with the assistance of the Iraqi intelligence service, which had its own strategic interest in destabilizing the Khomeini government. The Iraqi connection deserves analysis. In April 1980, Saddam Hussein's government was already planning what would become the Iran-Iraq War, which began in September 1980. Iraqi intelligence had been actively supporting Arab separatist and opposition groups within Iran as a means of internal destabilization. The DRFLA's operation in London served Iraqi strategic interests without requiring any direct Iraqi involvement that could be politically attributed. This is a pattern well documented in the literature of state-sponsored terrorism. A government provides support and logistics to a non-state group whose objectives align with the sponsor's interests, while maintaining plausible deniability. Within the building, the 6 gunmen held 26 hostages: Iranian embassy staff, British visitors who happened to be present at the time of the seizure, and PC Trevor Locke, a Metropolitan Police officer who had been on duty at the embassy entrance when the gunmen entered. Locke's presence inside the building would prove significant. He maintained his personal weapon throughout the siege, did not use it to precipitate a confrontation, and provided intelligence to negotiators about conditions inside. The group's psychological state evolved significantly over the 6 days. Initial confidence and apparent cohesion gave way under the pressure of failed negotiations and the passage of time to internal stress fractures. The leader Salim became increasingly erratic. The prospects of achieving their demands, always slim, given that the Iranian government had no incentive to negotiate with what it characterized as mercenaries in the pay of Iraq, diminished to near zero as the days passed. The Metropolitan Police's response to the embassy seizure was rapid and followed established major incident protocols. Within minutes of the first emergency calls, the area around Prince's Gate was sealed, and the inner cordon, immediately around the building, was established by officers from the Diplomatic Protection Group. An outer cordon, keeping the public and press at a greater distance, was established further out in the surrounding streets. The negotiation function was handled by trained police negotiators working from a forward control post established in a building adjacent to the embassy. The negotiation strategy was constructed around several principles that had been developed from the academic and operational work on hostage psychology done in the 1970s, primarily in the United States following the 1972 Munich massacre and the 1973 Hanafi Muslim siege in Washington. The behavioral change stairway model, though that formal term came later, was already implicit in the negotiators' approach. Establish communication, build rapport, you create trust, use that trust to produce behavioral compliance, and ultimately create conditions for resolution. The negotiators' goals were, in order of priority: maintain communication, avoid harm to hostages, obtain intelligence about conditions inside the building, and create time for the tactical option to be developed and rehearsed if needed. The police also managed the extraordinary media presence that surrounded the building for the entire 6 days of the siege. Prince's Gate was one of the most filmed locations in the world during this period. The management of media access, keeping cameras far enough away that they could not compromise tactical planning while close enough to maintain the public narrative, was itself a significant operational task, where the decision-making architecture for the Iranian Embassy Siege operated at 3 levels. At the strategic level, the Cabinet Office Briefing Room, COBR, was convened under Home Secretary William Whitelaw, who had responsibility for domestic security. COBR is the British government's primary crisis management body. It brings together ministers, intelligence chiefs, police commanders, and military representatives in a single room, with secure communications and continuous information flow. Its purpose is to reduce the time between information, decision, and action to a minimum. The key decision COBR would eventually face was the transition of primacy from police to military, the moment at which the SAS assault would be authorized. Under British constitutional convention, The military cannot act domestically without explicit civilian authorization. The formal mechanism was the Home Secretary's letter to the Director of Special Forces requesting SAS assistance. The handover of primacy document that existed in a template form at Hereford and would be completed and signed if the situation demanded it. At the operational level, the police Gold Commander managed the overall response, coordinating the containment force, the negotiating team, and the liaison with the military planners who were working alongside the police from early in the siege. The Gold Commander's key function was to integrate all sources of information. The negotiators read of Salim's psychological state, the intelligence product from technical surveillance, the SAS's tactical assessment, into a single operational picture. But Prime Minister Thatcher's personal involvement in the crisis was significant, but deliberately structured to maintain the constitutional appropriateness of the response. She did not attend COBR until the final days, but was continuously briefed. Her political instincts were clear. She did not believe in capitulation to terrorist demands. But the operational decisions remained with Whitelaw and the professional security services. The SAS unit that would execute the assault was B Squadron's Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Wing, based at Stirling Lines in Hereford. CRW had been established specifically to develop and maintain Britain's hostage rescue and counterterrorism capability following Munich. By 1980, CRW had developed a comprehensive doctrine for building assault operations. This doctrine addressed every element of the operational problem: intelligence gathering and analysis, building layout mapping, entry point selection, breaching techniques, the use of stun grenades, room clearing sequences, hostage terrorist discrimination under time pressure, and communications within the assault team. The equipment that defined CRW's operations was also well developed by 1980. The Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun, the same weapon used at Mogadishu 3 years earlier, was the standard assault weapon. The black Nomex suit and respirator, which would become instantly recognizable imagery from the embassy assault, served both functional purposes: flame resistance from potential fire, protection from CS gas used in breaching, and a deliberate intimidation effect. The assault team for the Iranian Embassy operation was approximately 32 personnel, organized into multiple assault groups assigned to different entry points and different floors of the building. The command element was separate from the assault teams, managing communications and timing. The support element provided sniper coverage of the building's windows from adjacent buildings, intelligence gathering during the siege, fire support if required during the assault. The SAS had been covertly positioned at a staging area near the embassy from the first or second day of the siege, conducting reconnaissance and building their operational plan in parallel with the police negotiation effort. This parallel track, negotiate with every intention of reaching a peaceful resolution, while simultaneously building the capability and plan for forced resolution, is the standard template of professional siege management. The Metropolitan Police's containment of the Iranian Embassy site represents a textbook application of urban siege management principles developed through Northern Ireland experience and academic work on major incident response. The cordon system operated at 3 levels. The inner cordon, a tight ring of officers and vehicles around the building itself, prevented any movement in or out and served as the forward line of the police presence. The middle cordon was established at a distance that removed uninvolved civilians from the immediate area while still maintaining police control of the incident scene. The outer cordon controlled media, public observers, and traffic at a distance that kept the character of normal London life as intact as possible. An important political and psychological signal that the state was managing the situation without creating a larger public disorder. The buildings adjacent to the embassy, numbers 14, 15, and 17 Princes Gate, were evacuated and taken over for operational purposes. These adjacent buildings served as the forward control post for negotiations, the staging area for the SAS, the base for technical intelligence collection, and the sniper position. The three-dimensional use of adjacent structures is a defining feature of urban siege management that distinguishes professional responses from improvised ones. The negotiation effort at Prince's Gate ran continuously for 6 days. The negotiating team, working from the forward control post and communicating with Salim through a field telephone line run into the building, maintained an unbroken communication channel that served multiple functions simultaneously. The primary intelligence function of negotiation is often underappreciated. Every conversation with Salim produced information. How many gunmen? What was their state? Where were the hostages being held? What was happening inside? The negotiators were trained to ask indirect questions that produced direct intelligence without alerting Salim to the intelligence-gathering purpose. A question like, "How are the hostages feeling?" produced information about their location, their treatment, and their access to food and water. The negotiators also controlled time. Every hour of negotiation was an hour during which the SAS could refine their plan, rehearse their entry sequence, and gather additional intelligence. Every hostage released, 5 were released during the siege in 2 separate groups, reduced the number of lives at risk in the final assault scenario. The negotiators' ability to secure releases was itself a demonstration of incremental progress that kept the situation stable. The psychological trajectory of the gunmen over 6 days was intensively analyzed by the police psychologists and the intelligence services. By day 4 and 5, the assessments were indicating increasing instability in Salim's behavior, erratic demands, contradictory statements, and signs of the stress fractures that prolonged high-pressure situations invariably produce in groups not specifically trained for extended operations. The psychological read was fed directly into the tactical planning. An assault on day 1 would have faced a more cohesive and alert group than an assault on day 6. The intelligence picture of what was happening inside the Iranian embassy was built from multiple parallel collection efforts operating continuously throughout the 6 days. Technical intelligence was the primary collection platform. MI5, the domestic intelligence service, deployed listening devices into the building through adjacent structures, through the building's utility infrastructure, and through techniques that remain partially classified. The acoustic intelligence product allowed analysts to track the movement of gunmen and hostages within the building, to hear conversations, and to build a picture of the internal geography and population distribution that was updated continuously. Human intelligence from released hostages was a second collection stream. Each hostage released was immediately and thoroughly debriefed by intelligence officers. The information they provided, room layouts, guard positions, the gunmen's behavior patterns, the location of specific hostages, was cross-referenced with the technical product to produce an increasingly detailed operational picture. PC Trevor Locke, the police officer held inside, maintained covert communication through various means, providing a trained observer's perspective on conditions inside the building. His professional training as a police officer meant that his observations were structured and reliable in ways that civilian hostage observations often are not. The SAS's own reconnaissance was a third collection stream. By the 3rd day, operators had entered the building from adjacent structures and the roof, conducting acoustic and visual reconnaissance that added to the intelligence picture. This physical reconnaissance was conducted with extreme caution. Any discovery would precipitate an immediate crisis, but it produced intelligence that could not be obtained by other means. The SAS's assault plan for the Iranian embassy addressed a building of specific characteristics 5 floors, multiple entry points, a complex internal layout with rooms of varying sizes and configurations, known hostage locations on specific floors, and a threat element of 6 gunmen distributed through the building. The entry plan was built around simultaneous multi-point entry, the same principle used at Mogadishu 3 years earlier, and now a standard element of CRW doctrine. Simultaneous entry from roof abseiling, ground-level window breaches, and the front door would prevent any gunman from receiving warning from one entry before another entry team reached him. The coordination requirement was extreme. All elements had to breach within seconds of each other. Stun grenades, the same L2A1 device used at Mogadishu, were the primary entry tool. Thrown into a room before physical entry, they created the disorientation window within which the assault team could enter and engage before a defender could respond coherently. But the grenade's effect, extreme light and sound for approximately 0.3 seconds, sufficient to overwhelm sensory processing, was the tactical key to the assault's speed. The close quarters battle doctrine that SAS CRW had developed by 1980 was built around the principle of total aggression from the moment of entry. There is no middle option in a live hostage rescue assault. Hesitation in engaging a gunman gives that gunman the opportunity to engage a hostage. The training that CRW operators underwent, thousands of rounds fired in the Killing House at Hereford, the building assault simulator designed specifically for this work, was designed to produce reflexive, accurate fire under the maximum possible stress. The challenge of hostage terrorist discrimination under these conditions is significant and often underappreciated. When the assault team enters a room with multiple individuals in it, under conditions of smoke, noise, disorientation, and extreme time pressure, the ability to identify and engage only the gunmen, who may be attempting to blend with hostages, who may not be clearly distinguishable from a distance, who may be using a hostage as a shield, is the most demanding skill the team has to exercise. The training cycles at Hereford were specifically designed to build this discrimination capability. The Iranian Embassy Siege was one of the first major security crises in British history to be covered live on television from the beginning. The BBC and ITN had camera positions established from the first day. Millions of people across Britain watched events develop in real time. The media dimension created both operational challenges and strategic opportunities for the government. The challenge, camera positions that could potentially reveal tactical movements, had to be managed without appearing to censor press freedom, a politically sensitive constraint in a liberal democracy. The tactical planning had to account for the possibility that gunmen could observe news coverage inside the building, which was known to be happening. The opportunity, the live coverage created an unprecedented public record of the event and, ultimately, of the assault itself. The images of SAS operators in black gear abseiling down the building's facade and breaking through the windows were broadcast live. The public impact of those images, the visceral demonstration of state capability being applied against terrorism, was immediately and durably significant. The Thatcher government understood the political value of this demonstration. In the political environment of 1980, a government that could respond to terrorism with decisive, professional, successful force was communicating something important about its character. The live broadcast of the Prince's Gate assault was not planned as a political event. It was the consequence of pre-existing media positions. But its political effect was entirely consistent with the government's self-presentation. At 11:25 on the morning of Wednesday, April 30th, 6 armed men approached the Iranian Embassy at 16 Prince's Gate. The day was overcast. The street was quiet. Police Constable Trevor Locke was on duty at the embassy entrance, a standard Metropolitan Police diplomatic protection post. The gunman moved quickly. Locke drew his revolver, but was overwhelmed before he could fire. He was taken inside with the first group of hostages. The seizure of the building was accomplished in less than 2 minutes. The gunmen controlled all 5 floors. They had 26 hostages. They had their demands written out in Arabic and English. The first calls to the police went out almost immediately, from embassy staff who managed to get to a telephone before the building was fully secured, and from Tapestry House, the BBC building adjacent to the embassy, where a producer had observed the seizure from a window. The Metropolitan Police's initial response was rapid. The first patrol cars arrived within minutes. The area was sealed. His senior officers were notified. And within the first hour, the machinery of the British crisis response system, from the local police response through to the Home Office and ultimately COBR, was activating in a sequence that the government had prepared for, but never previously executed in this precise form. The first 24 hours established the framework within which the next 5 days would be managed. The Metropolitan Police established its command structure: a gold commander overseeing the strategic response, a silver commander managing the operational detail, and bronze commanders responsible for specific functional areas: containment, negotiation, liaison with intelligence services, media management, and liaison with the military. The negotiation channel was established within the first hours. A field telephone line was run to the embassy. Salim, the leader, became the primary point of contact. The first conversation was exploratory. The negotiators identified themselves, explained the police role, and began the process of establishing the communication relationship that would be the platform for everything that followed. In parallel, the SAS was notified and began moving toward London. B Squadron CRW deployed to a staging area in the Regent's Park Barracks, close enough to Prince's Gate to move quickly, far enough away that their presence was not immediately detectable. From the staging area, they began their intelligence analysis and preliminary assault planning. The first day also saw the first demonstration of the gunmen's willingness to release hostages as a negotiating tool. To one hostage, an Iranian woman who was not an embassy employee, was released on the afternoon of April 30th, providing the first direct human intelligence about conditions inside. The negotiators used this release to build on the rapport they were attempting to establish with Salim. The middle phase of the siege was characterized by the establishment of a stable, if tense, pattern: daily negotiations, incremental intelligence gathering, gradual refinement of the SAS assault plan, and the psychological attrition of the gunmen under the pressure of their increasingly apparent failure. The gunmen's demands had been communicated to the Iranian government through diplomatic channels. The Khomeini government's response was essentially contemptuous. They characterized the gunmen as mercenaries in the pay of Iraq and refused to consider releasing any Arab prisoners, and made clear that they had no interest in the fate of their diplomats held by what they called counter-revolutionary criminals. This response, which reached the gunmen through the negotiators on day 2, was a significant psychological blow. The strategic logic of the operation, pressure on the Iranian government through a British intermediary, was simply not working. On May 1st, a second group of hostages was released, this time including a sick Pakistani hostage. The release again served the negotiators' goals. It reduced the hostage population, it produced additional intelligence, and it maintained the communication dynamic. But from the gunmen's perspective, it produced nothing. No progress on their demands. No indication that anything was changing. By May 3rd, the intelligence picture was indicating that Salim's psychological state was deteriorating. Conversations were becoming more erratic. The negotiators began to hear signs of internal disagreement within the gunman group. The SAS's assault plan was now substantially complete. A multi-entry simultaneous breach using abseiling from the roof on the rear elevation, ground-level window breaches at the front, and a charge into the front entrance. The rehearsals at the staging area had refined the entry sequence to the point where the team was confident in the plan. The key variable that would determine whether the assault would be executed was the threshold defined in the COBR decision framework. If life was directly and imminently threatened and negotiation had demonstrably failed, the handover of primacy to the SAS would be authorized. When this threshold was not yet met, negotiation was continuing. Hostages were alive. The situation, while tense, had not yet crossed into the territory of imminent lethal violence. The threshold was crossed on the afternoon of May 5th. At approximately 13:30, Salim issued an ultimatum. If his demands were not met by a specific time, he would begin executing hostages. The negotiators worked to defuse the ultimatum, but the psychology of the gunmen had by this point reached a critical deterioration point. Salim was no longer responsive to the negotiation techniques that had kept the situation stable. At approximately 18:50, 3 shots were heard inside the embassy. Then another shot. The body of Abbas Lavasani, a press attaché who had been identified to the negotiators as the most politically confrontational of the hostages, a committed supporter of the Islamic Republic who had reportedly argued with Salim over the course of the siege, was pushed out of the front door of the embassy. Lavasani's death changed the operational calculation entirely. The threshold for the handover of primacy had been crossed. Life had been taken, and the trajectory was clearly toward more killing. The negotiators continued to communicate, maintaining the channel, buying minutes. But the decision was now being made at COBR level. Home Secretary Whitelaw convened an emergency session. The police gold commander formally requested military assistance. The Home Secretary's letter was signed. Primacy passed to the Director of Special Forces. The SAS assault was authorized. The time was approximately 1900. The assault would begin at approximately 1923. The operational name assigned to the SAS assault was Operation Nimrod. The plan that had been developed over 5 days was now to be executed with whatever precision the conditions allowed. The assault force was organized into 3 primary elements. The first element would abseil from the roof to reach the second-floor balcony on the rear of the building, the Prince's Gate garden side, and breach the windows there. The second element would approach the building from the front, using the first-floor balcony on the Prince's Gate facade to reach upper-floor windows. The third element would breach the front door and stairwell. At 1923, the signal was given. The abseiling team began their descent on the rear elevation. Almost immediately, one of the operators became entangled in his abseil rope. A malfunction that immobilized him against the building's facade and could not be quickly resolved. The assault proceeded anyway. In close quarters battle doctrine, the operation does not stop for individual malfunctions. The teams adjusted and continued. Stun grenades were thrown through the windows at the moment of entry. The explosions were visible and audible from the street. The assault teams entered simultaneously through multiple points. Inside the building, the gunmen began to react. Salim fired into the hostages on the second floor and was engaged and killed by the assault team before he could continue. 3 other gunmen were killed in separate engagements on different floors. One gunman attempted to conceal himself among the hostages on the telex room floor. He was identified and taken into custody after the other hostages physically identified him to the assault team. 1 other gunman survived. The assault itself, from first entry to the declaration of building clear, took approximately 11 minutes. During this time, the entangled abseil operator was cut free and dropped to the ground. A fire started on the second floor, caused by a stun grenade igniting curtains. The entangled operator had been hanging directly above the fire, which had contributed to the urgency of cutting him free. All remaining hostages, 19 individuals, survived. One hostage, Sim Harris, a BBC journalist who had been in the building at the time of the seizure. He later described being pushed and carried out of the building by the assault team under conditions of fire and smoke. 5 of the 6 gunmen were killed. One was taken into custody. He was subsequently convicted of murder and conspiracy and sentenced to life imprisonment, later reduced on appeal. The immediate aftermath of Operation Nimrod was managed with the same professionalism that had characterized the preceding 6 days. Hostages were moved to a casualty collection point, medically assessed, and transported to hospital. The building was secured and the scene preserved for the forensic investigation that would follow. The media, which had filmed significant portions of the assault from their established positions, transmitted footage that was broadcast within minutes of the all-clear. The political response was swift. Where Prime Minister Thatcher personally visited the SAS assault team at their staging area, a visit that produced some of the most reproduced imagery of her premiership and cemented the visual association between her government and the successful application of state force against terrorism. The 6-day siege had produced 1 death among the hostages, Lavasani, killed shortly before the assault, and 1 death among the embassy staff during the assault itself. No police officers or SAS personnel were killed. The injured operator, who had been entangled in his abseil rope, suffered burns but survived. Operation Nimrod's most immediate institutional consequence was the transformation of the SAS's public profile and its formal role in British counterterrorism. Before April 30th, 1980, whilst the SAS was a regiment whose existence was officially acknowledged, but whose capabilities and operations were deliberately kept from public view. The Prince's Gate assault, broadcast live, filmed in remarkable detail, and replayed continuously, made the SAS the most visually recognizable special forces unit in the world within 24 hours. The black Nomex suits, the respirators, the abseiling descent, the window breaches. These images became immediately iconic. The institutional consequence was the formalization of CRW's role. After Nimrod, the SAS's counterterrorism function was not merely tolerated as a contingency capability. It was actively resourced, expanded, and integrated into the British government's security architecture. COBR's procedures for the handover of primacy were refined, or the relationship between the police gold commander and the military commander was codified. The decision thresholds were clarified. The British counter-terrorism framework that exists today, with a clear sequence from police response to negotiation to authorized military action, owes its specific form to the lessons of Prince's Gate. The Iranian Embassy Siege was, in a very direct sense, the operational test of a system that had been theoretically developed but never previously executed at this scale. The operational lessons of Prince's Gate were systematically analyzed within the SAS and the broader British security community in the months after the event. Several specific doctrinal principles were confirmed or established. The first was the operational value of patience. The 6 days of negotiation before the assault were not wasted time. They were productive time. Each day refined the intelligence picture, degraded the gunmen's psychological cohesion, reduced the hostage population through releases, and allowed the assault plan to be developed and rehearsed to a standard that could not have been achieved in the first 24 hours. the lesson that patience in a hostage situation produces better conditions for resolution, whether through negotiation or through force, became a cornerstone of British siege doctrine. The second was the necessity of parallel planning. The negotiation and the assault planning operated simultaneously, with full communication between the two tracks. The negotiators knew that the SAS was preparing an assault. Or the SAS knew exactly what the negotiators were learning from their communications. This integration, rather than treating negotiation and tactical response as alternatives, allowed each track to inform the other. The third was the decisive value of simultaneous multi-point entry supported by disorientation devices. The assault speed, 11 minutes from entry to clear, was the product of an entry design that prevented any single gunman from receiving meaningful warning before the assault reached him. The stun grenade doctrine, the simultaneous breach, and the total aggression CQB approach combined to produce a result in which 5 of 6 gunmen were neutralized before they could organize an effective counter-response. The fourth lesson was the complexity of the human factor. The entanglement of the abseil operator was an unplanned event that could not have been foreseen. The fire started by the stun grenade was an unplanned event. The assault plan survived these contingencies because the operators had been trained to continue operating through unexpected friction. The military principle of Auftragstaktik, mission command, applied at the individual level. Each operator knew the mission's objective well enough to continue executing it, even when the specific plan diverged from reality. The Iranian Embassy Siege established a template for media coverage of security crises that has been followed, refined, and occasionally disrupted in every major incident since. The presence of cameras at Prince's Gate from the first day created a continuous visual record that served multiple audiences simultaneously. The public, who watched in real time, the political leadership, who received immediate feedback on public reaction, the gunmen, who monitored broadcasts inside the building and were affected by what they saw, and the international community, who observed the British state's response. The live broadcast of the assault itself, something that no one had specifically planned, but that was a logical consequence of the pre-existing camera positions, created an entirely new form of public event. The real-time security crisis, unfolding on screen as it happened, with outcomes unknown. The tension of those 11 minutes, the smoke, the abseiling figures, the distant sounds of gunfire, the eventual emergence of hostages, was experienced by millions of people simultaneously, because the management of this media presence, keeping cameras far enough away to protect tactical plans while close enough to maintain transparent public information, became a studied element of subsequent crisis management doctrine. The relationship between media access and operational security in urban siege situations is now a distinct topic in crisis management training, and its modern form descends directly from the experience of Prince's Gate. The Iranian Embassy Siege occupies a specific and durable place in the symbolic geography of British national identity. It is the moment at which a specific set of values, the non-negotiation with terrorism, the professionalism of state response, the primacy of the rule of law, were demonstrated rather than merely declared. For the Thatcher government, Prince's Gate was a defining moment in its early years. The political messaging of the period, "This government will not be intimidated," was given concrete, visual, dramatic substance by 11 minutes of SAS action on a London afternoon. The political benefit was real, substantial, and lasting. For the SAS as an institution, the siege was transformative in ways that extended beyond public profile. The regiment had demonstrated that its training, doctrine, and command structure were capable of executing a complex domestic hostage rescue under extreme public scrutiny, and with a standard of performance that, by any objective measure, was exceptional. This demonstration had internal effects, reinforcing the regiment's self-understanding of its purpose and capability, as well as external ones. For counterterrorism more broadly, Prince's Gate was a data point in the emerging doctrine of the 1980s, that states could respond to terrorism with professional military force, that the capability could be built and maintained as a deterrent, and that the political cost of demonstrating that capability was significantly lower than the political cost of failing to respond. The Iranian Embassy Siege is remembered primarily for its final 11 minutes. The images of the assault are among the most reproduced in the history of British security affairs. They are genuinely dramatic, and their drama is real. But the analysis that matters is not about those 11 minutes. It is about the 6 days that preceded them. The 6 days were the product of a system of crisis management that had been built, tested in theoretical exercises, and now faced its first major real-world test at this scale. The COBR decision architecture, the police cordon and negotiation procedures, the intelligence collection methods, the SAS parallel planning process, the political decision chain. Each element of this system performed the function it was designed to perform. The hostage Lavasani died because negotiation ultimately failed to prevent an act of murder. This is not a failure of the system. It is the limit of what any system can guarantee. What the system did was delay that moment long enough to prepare a response, reduce the number of people at risk, build the intelligence picture to the point where the assault could be executed with confidence, and create conditions under which one death preceded the rescue of 19 people. The system worked because it had been built before the crisis. The SAS CRW capability existed because of Munich 8 years earlier. The COBR procedures existed because of Northern Ireland. The negotiation doctrine existed because of the academic and operational work done in the United States in the 1970s. None of these elements was improvised at Prince's Gate. All of them were there when needed. That is the structural lesson of the Iranian Embassy Siege. Institutional capability, built patiently and maintained carefully in the years before a crisis, is what creates the possibility of a crisis with a recoverable outcome. Structure determined what was possible. And on the afternoon of May 5th, 1980, what was possible was enough. You have been watching The Command Structure. Subscribe if you think in systems.